Thank you to Zohar, Asaf, and everyone for this opportunity. I apologize for speaking in English. Ulai ani medaber b'ivrit. Believe me, it's for your benefit, not mine, that I speak in English. I blame my grandchildren for that. They refuse to converse. They live in Jerusalem, but they won't talk to me in Hebrew. They say my Hebrew is, I think the word they use is matuk, but I don't know if they mean it. I'm going to talk about a much smaller subject than what you've heard up to now, but it's an important subject for this group, I think. And that's the question: make Delaware great again. We live in interesting times. Okay, so I have a clicker, but it doesn't click. Yeah, okay. There's been a lot going on in Delaware in the last 2 years since this conference last met. And the significance, of course, is not lost here because it was at this program that there was a debate between then President Aaron Barak and the Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court at that time, Myron Steele, on the subject of whether Israel should have an economic court. President Barak was opposed, and he spoke about the idea that reasonableness is the bottom issue in every case. No one can be a judge of any kind unless they deeply understand constitutional law and reasonableness. To the Delaware ears that were in the room, that was virtually incomprehensible. But we've seen in the last couple of years great turmoil in Delaware, uncharacteristic turmoil. But the bottom line is the bottom line there. Incorporation in Delaware provides a minimum of 1/3 of the state's revenue. It allows it to have no sales tax, which is unusual in the United States. And 1/3 probably understates the impact of incorporations because it doesn't take into account the whole infrastructure that's built around the fact of Delaware's place. Oh, the wrong way. Oh, I forgot, it's left to right. So what was the background for what's been going on in Delaware? I think it's pretty much agreed. There was a series of decisions, 2 from the Court of Chancery and 1 from the Delaware Supreme Court in the last couple of years. We all have heard of the Musk compensation case, in which Elon Musk was found to be a controller of Tesla, even though he only owned roughly almost 22% of the stock. And the court also found that a majority of the directors of Tesla were, quote unquote, either beholden or had acted beholden to Musk and therefore were not independent. And the court ordered rescission of the very large pay package that the board had granted to him. And that sent a shockwave through a lot of corporate America. Another opinion of significance, the Sears home case, also by the Court of Chancery, for the first time held that a controlling stockholder could have liability for voting its shares, and could be responsible not just for breaches of the duty of loyalty under Delaware law, but also for breaches of the duty of care. And then the final nail in the coffin was the decision in 2024 in Match, a case very dear to my heart. It's the last case I argued in the Delaware Supreme Court on December 13th, 2023, in which the Delaware Supreme Court held that any controller conflict transaction could only receive business judgment review if it was cleansed by both a wholly independent special committee and a fully informed majority-minority vote. It collapsed the distinction, which some thought had existed in the prior case law between controller squeeze-outs, the strongest form of controller conflict when the proverbial 800-pound gorilla wishes to buy the rest of the bananas, and held that to get that in any controller conflict case, and that was a spin-off, but the same rule would apply to compensation decisions or any other form of controller conflict. It required the full MFW suite, that is special committee approval of independent directors and fully informed stockholder approval in order to get business judgment review. And there was a sense in Delaware that whether or not a director is independent had become increasingly unpredictable. I can say that in the short period of time of my practice, for the first time it became important to know which judge the case had been assigned to. In the old days, there were 5 members of the Court of Chancery, now there are 7, but it didn't used to matter who got the case. You didn't think about that so much. Now, or at least in recent years, it has become quite significant. So I'd like to discuss briefly a few questions around SB 21, the statute that was adopted in 2024. Without going into the details of what it did, it created safe harbors for interested transactions. In effect, it overturned the match, it reversed match. For the first time in Delaware's history, it had a definition of a disinterested director, it had a definition of controlling stockholders, and it tried to put parameters around books and records, production of documents, which is an amazing thing in Delaware. A stockholder, before even filing a lawsuit, can serve you with a 1 or 2 page letter demanding books and records of the company on any credible claim of mismanagement. It's the lowest possible standard. A 2-page letter can cost an American public company $10 million to respond, now that we are blessed with email discovery. And I'm not going to go into great detail on these subjects. I'd like to step back and talk about and try to discuss with you what are the broader themes that are emerging. If you want greater detail, I'm happy to provide this entire deck, which I'm not going to go through to anyone. You can call at any time. I assume you know the rules about when Wachtell Lipton is open? There are 2 rules. Let's see, Kobe knows the rules. Wachtell Lipton is open every day the New York Stock Exchange is open. Rule number 2, Wachtell Lipton is open anytime the New York Stock Exchange is closed. So if you apply one of the 2 rules, you'll figure out whether we're open or not. But an interesting thing happened both during and after the enactment of SB 21. Most of the activity, with the exception of match, was in the Court of Chancery. What has the Supreme Court of Delaware done? You see reversed, reversed, reversed. In the Musk case, an amazing decision, reversed the rescission remedy, gave Musk back his pay package, awarded $1 in nominal damages. Don't ask who pays the $1. That's the single most vexing question that exists in Delaware today, is who's going to pay that dollar. And cut the plaintiff's attorney's fees down. They initially requested $6 billion in attorney's fees, which even for plaintiff's lawyers in America, was a lot of money. So they're only going to get $55 million in fees for producing a $1 recovery to the company. Not bad. In Maffei, in which the Court of Chancery had held that there was a potential liability of directors for having approved moving out of Delaware, the court reversed and held that a board's decision to reincorporate out of Delaware is protected by business judgment rather than entire fairness if it's made on a clear day. In the Moelis case, it reversed again, avoiding the merits again by finding that the claim was barred by laches. And earlier this year, they upheld the constitutionality of the new Delaware statute, SB 21, and made the observation that in essence what the new statute does is codify the result that the defendants, my side of the case, advocated and was rejected in match. Well, again, I go the wrong way. But I submit that the real significance of SB 21 is not the particular provisions of the statute, but rather the kind of the atmospherics that accompanied it. The statute was created in a break from normal practice. The normal practice in Delaware was that the Corporation Law Council, which is part of the state bar, every year reviews the statute, comes up with amendments, proposes them to the governor. They go to the two houses of the Delaware legislature and they're passed with very little controversy. This statute was written at the request of the governor directly to a committee of 3 people that he selected with the goal of hitting off companies exiting Delaware for, at the time, and still considered today a serious question, Nevada or Texas. But for the first time, we saw within the state of Delaware a politicization of the corporate law. We'll look at some slides in a minute about popular appeal to the citizenry of Delaware on subjects like, what should there be safe harbors for the business judgment rule as opposed to entire fairness? It was the first time that the Delaware legislature had stepped in and tried to regulate the contours of fiduciary duty doctrine, something that had always been left entirely to the judges, the first time they'd ever tried to define controlling stockholder or disinterestedness. Now, the big question that was hanging over everyone's head in Delaware, and still is today, is whether Dexit is a real thing or not. Now, here you see a list of the household names that have left Delaware. All of these companies, with the exception of ExxonMobil, are controlled companies. That is, where there's an individual or a group of people who have the ability to adopt a reincorporation proposal. Reincorporation in Delaware, of course, requires approval both by the board of directors and by the stockholders. ExxonMobil is an exception. On the other hand, ExxonMobil moving to Texas wasn't that big a deal because its headquarters, its real business was always in Texas. Some of the early academics literature suggested that Dexit was not really a threat. Glass Lewis, one of the 2 premier proxy advisory firms in Delaware, published a study in covering 2025, that basically took the position that while there's widespread fear of Dexit, they concluded that the fear was greater than the reality, pointing out that in the 2025 proxy season, 18 of 28 companies had proposed leaving Delaware versus a smaller percentage in the prior year, but it was kind of like no big deal. In Professor Hamdani's new hometown of Oxford, a very interesting paper, a series of papers was published on the subject. And I think the conclusion at the bottom is a very interesting one. A dual race equilibrium. That Delaware is and will remain, the prediction is, the home for publicly held companies that prize what the paper refers to as adjudicative premium. Whereas Nevada and Texas will be the form of choice for controllers who prefer bright line rules, and makes the point that switching is difficult. You can't create Delaware just by copying the statute. I agree with that. And there's been a lot of literature. This is a series of graphs created by Analysis Group. You see the spike at the time of the Tesla decision. And this simply is charting news stories. What are people talking about? And you see a great spike at the time of the Tesla decision about reincorporation, but what actually happened? From 22 to 23, very small numbers. 4 net total leaving Delaware. From 24 to the second half of 25, it increased rather significantly, but the numbers are still not huge. Yes? 5 minutes? 5 דקות, זהו? Okay. These are the statistics people are most focused on, IPOs. Where are the private companies being incorporated when they go public to market, and you see Delaware shares dropped previously from 90% to as low as 70%. Don't underestimate the Musk factor. These are the tweets from Elon Musk. The first one is when he lost the Trinetta case, never incorporate in Delaware, recommending Nevada or Texas. Then he took a poll. Should Tesla move to Texas? He got 87% yes. Who's the poll? The poll's not of stockholders. The poll's of ex-people, probably bots, but he won. So he announced that the public vote is unequivocally in favor of Texas. Okay, that's a good way to run an election. This was an extremely important statement from Musk shortly after the election in the United States. When Trump won, which surprised some people, and then at that time Elon Musk was his buddy, maybe his buddy again, but he was his buddy then, and he referred to the fact that the federal government should take immediate corrective action. Federalization of corporate law is a much greater threat to Delaware, in my view, than either Nevada, Texas, or any other reincorporation. As promised, these are scenes from Delaware during the debate about SB 21. Lawn signs, no to Elon Musk, no to SB 21, protect your pensions. Professor Coates at the Harvard Law School, on the day SB 21 was adopted, he wrote he was going to change his teaching materials to note that Delaware has decided it no longer wants to protect shareholders. The day it's lost its dominance began in earnest. Overstatement? Huh, huge overstatement. Here's the unnamed academic. I'm an academic now, but it wasn't me. Announcing that Delaware has shown it no longer respects anyone outside of billionaires, it should no longer expect respect from anyone else. These are a series of letters that were written to the governor of Delaware. And I think this is really, and notice when Marty Lipton put out, we were under great pressure to make, we're a foreign law firm, we're in New York. Who cares what New Yorkers think? If you live in Delaware, New Yorkers are like, we're the Yankees. I mean, we don't have a whole lot to say. But there was a lot of pressure to put out a statement, and we supported this legislation because it really does almost nothing. But that's why we have to thank the academics, and that's the final point I'll make. The academics did a great service to Delaware. How? Because they made it seem like SB 21 was a huge change. It was not a huge change. SB 21 did no more than reverse the error of match. Indeed, some have suggested that I lost the match case on purpose. Because if I wouldn't have lost the match case, there couldn't have been SB 21. And for that, I get no thanks, I got no medal, I got nothing, except one in the loss column. But it's very hard to predict, as some of the previous speakers spoke about much more important topics, very hard to predict what's going to happen in Delaware. I think Yogi Bear got it exactly right. It's very hard to predict the future. Why? Because it hasn't happened yet. But it will, and I think basically Delaware will weather this storm, and we'll all come back again hopefully next year and for many more years to come to discuss what's going on in Delaware. Thank you very much.